This is Dane Wigington with Geoengineeringwatch.org, and you're listening to the Coming Collapse Q&A. Commercial-free, no politics, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of covert climate engineering operations. Here's my question for the day. If the human race remains on the current course of all-out planetary decimation, how much time do we have until the extinction of our species? And will we bring the entire web of life down with us? We're getting close to that now, and few even realize it. Global food production is collapsing. On crop harvest, we have climate engineering a key part of that equation. We'll get to that later in this broadcast. We have fisheries collapsing around the globe. The oceans are dying by the day. And many refuse to believe it because they can still buy a box of Twinkies at their big box store. I know we have a full line of callers waiting in the queue. I'll get to that momentarily. I just want to make a few announcements before we kick off. Biden embraces oil as Ukraine war overwhelms his climate agenda. That's a headline from last week. Just reading headlines. Again, we are non-political on this broadcast. Every occupant of the White House is a puppet for the power structure. Doesn't matter what their political stripe is. And for the climate agenda for the occupants of the White House in reality, here it is. All-out climate intervention operations and drill, drill, drill. That's what's actually going on. Biden orders large release of oil from strategic reserve. This is a headline from last week as well. Prods drillers to step up production. Calls gas price hike the Putin price hike. Again, think of the core people in power behind the curtain and who benefits from everything going on in Ukraine at this moment. Global powers, again, are all working together on core issues. Climate engineering, COVID-19 are key examples. World spends, here's another headline from last week. World spends $1.8 trillion a year on subsidies that harm the environment, or should we more exactly state what's left of the environment? For the record, no functional habitat, no humans. Simple. Scientists state to Biden, world needs rapid transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. If you think so-called renewable energy, and again, I'm off the grid. Home was on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. I have hydropower, solar, and wind power. That's still not, quote, renewable energy. Batteries, everything that goes along with that is not renewable. Watch the groundbreaking film Planet of the Humans to learn more about that. Arctic temperatures going off the charts. Again, brought that up partially last week, had a massive ice shelf collapse, went over that last week. We have ramifications coming now from all of that. It's getting worse by the day. It's a non-linear equation. Have a few more headlines to cover. We have a scientist I hope will call in. I'm going to keep him anonymous. I'm not sure if he may be on one of the lines right now, and we don't know where he's at. Hopefully we can ID him. He's a key individual that has taken samples for Geoengineeringwatch.org, sampled precipitation for graphene, surfactants, which are in the frozen material that we're now told is snow, likely contributing to the massive traffic accidents that we see all over. We'll get to some of these headlines. Again, calling in, that's my question for the day. How long does the human race have until the extinction of our species? And for those that think that's not possible because somehow technology will save us, how's that going so far? First call, Carl from Utah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Dane. I certainly can. I want to tell you something, and it's very important. I want to tell you that you're doing a great disservice to the power structure, and I commend you for it, and I've supported you financially, and I encourage all listeners to help finance your mission, because your mission is the most important damn thing happening on this planet right now. Period. End of story. People out there, I'll try to cool out. People out there with eyes to see and ears to listen need to follow and understand what's happening, and to support it financially, because I know for a fact, because I have a good understanding of who you are. I've listened to you for years and years and years and years. I know for a fact that when you have these radio shows that last an hour, you are paying out of your own financial means to cover what would be advertisements. I know that for a fact. So those listening with ears to hear and eyes to see need to pay attention. And I want to say this too. I am so grateful for you, sir. I'm so grateful for you because you are making a difference on this planet, a major difference. And I pray for you regularly.
Knowing there's people like you out there keeps me marching forward in this fight. I am so grateful to hear from you. And for those that don't know how I came into this battle, when I moved into my off-grid home and I realized what was happening in the skies above me, blocking 70-80% of my solar PV uptake on specific days, I began to lab test. I did not want to find what I found in my rain, which was climate engineering elements. I began to research and was astounded at the amount of data I found that these operations were going on in skies all over the globe. I couldn't in good conscience go about my life in any aspect anymore. I was doing habitat restoration. I put everything on hold because I knew, as you correctly stated, this is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat. If we don't deal with this all-out assault against the planet's life support systems, again, every breath we take is toxic from these elements raining down through the air column. It's infiltrating the entire web of life, everything. These are bioavailable particulates. If we don't deal with this, we're done. It's that simple. All other points become moot. And I tried for 5 years to operate on my own SEP retirement account until that was exhausted. I sold off what land and resources I had to keep going. And again, I'm grateful to know there's people like you out there, Carl. And we're not alone. Our numbers are growing by the day. Carl, how are the conditions in Utah right now? And again, I'm so grateful for you calling in. Can you tell us how the conditions are? How dry is it? And what do you see in your skies?
Well, I mean, on a regular basis, obviously, we see the operations happening. I live in the desert, and we have a lot of dead trees here. I moved to this area just last year, but I immediately noticed a lot of death as far as trees go. But I want to say this: there was an individual who wrote a book called "Angels Don't Play This Harp." I don't know his name; he's a scientist, but I think part of my call today was to try to link together the operations above and then the HARP technology. Is there a way that you can have an expert on
good? Those are very good points. You're talking about Nick Begich, and I know Nick, and I encourage people to view that film. It's narrated by Martin Sheen called "Angels Don't Play This Harp," and that is about the ground-based radio frequency transmitters. HARP is one. We have microwave transmission networks as well. And these transmissions are being used to manipulate the atmospheric particulates. They're electrically conductive, and the transmissions have a repelling effect. It also allows them to bounce these signals off the atmosphere and back down to the surface of the planet, where there are other silent weapons for quiet wars ramifications from doing that. So, again, they're using the atmosphere for a physics lab. It's not just the toxic particles being spewed out from jet aircraft all over our skies that anybody but the clinically blind could see. But we have the radio frequency microwave transmissions, and now as methane is building up in the atmosphere, and it is, and this is the most significant source of methane is from the thawing and releasing methane hydrate and clathrate deposits. It's been happening for many decades. Those that know about the Bermuda Triangle scenario, we have methane release as the cause of that. As the ocean warms, massive methane deposits on the seafloor release in their entirety. It aerates the water like a bottle of champagne. The ships have no buoyancy. They go to the bottom. That methane then migrates into the atmosphere and spreads out like a layer of glass, trapping heat. And the heat buildup on the planet right now is the thermal equivalent of 7, as of the latest calculations, 7 Hiroshima bombs per second. That's how fast the heat is building up on the planet. The oceans have absorbed most of it. Now the oceans are dying. They're superheating. They're acidifying. The oxygen content dropping precipitously. Same with atmospheric oxygen. So bottom line is, yes, Carl, very important point. Massive aspect of climate engineering is the radio frequency microwave transmissions, and this is visible as it manipulates the particulates in our skies with the herringbone patterns. Carl, you've seen the herringbone patterns woven into the cloud, aerosol clouds.
I have certainly. I just want to make one last statement, and that is, what we do in this life echoes throughout eternity. And the time is now. If you've got a backbone and you already know this information, you need to share it, because the time is now. Those things that we do matter. Things we don't do matter as well, and they all echo throughout eternity. Thank you, Dave, for your time.
Carl, thank you for being who you are. I hope you can send us a message at admin@geoengineeringwatch.org. I'd like to connect with you off the air. Thank you very much for calling in, Carl. Todd from Palm Beach, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, Todd.
Yeah,
what's on your mind?
You're doing well. Well, actually, the first caller, I had a few things I wanted to quickly say, but his heartfelt words kind of took me away from kind of what I had planned to ask you.
When I hear, someone like Carl calling in, Todd, when I started this battle, I could only hear my own voice coming back at me. No one listened. No one. And to know that there's people like you and countless other activists that are giving their all, showing tremendous courage to face this head on, regardless of the resistance, gives me the fortitude to keep forging forward in this battle. So I'm very grateful for both of you. And Todd, it sounds like, I mean, you're aware of the issue, you're aware of what's happening in our skies, and granted, we face countless challenges converging from every direction, but what's happening in our skies will very soon determine our collective futures if it's not stopped. And at any point in time, if those in power choose to, if they feel they're losing control, they can put something much more lethal in this mix and put us all on our backs overnight. Literally, they can disperse a more lethal pathogen. We're done. Todd, how long, based on your observations, how long do you think the human race will be here if we remain on the current course?
I can't address that in maybe 30 seconds or less, because I always recommend you. You're the first and only person I recommend, and yet, in '84, I started to actually witness where I originally came from, the cloud patterns, and saw what they would do. I mean, I became cognizant of it because I used to do a lot of hiking up in the northeast of New York State, and I've always wondered what I saw was going on. I saw many strange things happen. I do think that the human race, I don't exactly see it that there's going to just be. I think the powers that be are intentionally trying to depopulate. That's a
I don't argue that. I don't argue that point. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know that they're not. How do I say this? I think it's a multi-leveled attack, and their intent is certainly to, as we just agreed, depopulate. And now we're seeing that, I've always told people don't listen to me. They don't listen when I express what the weather warfare fact, and people are conditioned. But
try passing on images, though. That would, I think, Todd, you think that would help. That would help immensely to pass on the images. We try to make that available at geoengineeringwatch.org for less than our cost. On the depopulation part, certainly that's occurring. But I would argue this, that all those agendas, again, become moot when the planet's life support systems cease. And we have a common thread amongst those in power, because too many assume those in power have laid out their calculations in a way that allows them to survive. And I would argue that is not the case if we remain on the current course. We have a common thread of the various forms of mental deficiency with those in power. The common thread is this: a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Would they do this to themselves? Yes, they have, and they continue to. We have the 2,400 nuclear detonations around the planet that have contaminated every living thing. We have a triple nuclear meltdown in Fukushima. We have Chernobyl that's going back into meltdown because that sarcophagus is disintegrating. We have 440 more nuke plants to go. So I would argue that on the current course, no one gets out alive. And that's what we need to wake the population up to, that if they go about their lives as if they're doing, or they're going to continue in any way, shape, or form, as Carl stated, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. So again, my point is, and why we focused on this issue at geoengineeringwatch.org, it is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat. It is the issue with which those in power can take us all out anytime they want, and they're doing a damn good job of it right now, frankly. And if we don't deal with this, nothing else matters. And if we could bring this to light, and populations around the globe knew they were a part of a grand and lethal experiment without their knowledge or consent, we would perhaps be able to change the flavor of the impact that's about to happen. Todd, is there anything else you want to say in closing? The phone lines are jammed. I want to get to those as quick as I can.
Yeah, I mean, is there a way? I mean, Dane, I have a lot to say, especially respond. Is there a way that I can maybe email you or
absolutely? Absolutely. Thank you for asking, and thank you for marching in this battle with us. admin@geoengineeringwatch.org. Joe in the Midwest. Can you hear me, Joe?
Hey, Dane. This is the scientist that I've been working with you over the years to try to expose what these people are doing to our society.
Thank you for calling in, and for those that we're going on an alias right now, this is the individual I'm speaking to is an extremely important, extremely courageous individual research scientist in environmental sciences at the top 10 university, and the help he has afforded to this battle, to exposing what's in the precipitation falling from our skies, is immense. And again, we'll continue to call you Joe at this point, but can you share with us what you have found in precipitation, starting with surfactants and graphene?
Yes, Dane. So like many of the callers before, you were the one who helped open my eye to what was happening. And being a scientist, I thought, well, if Dane found all of this, I can do my own test and see if I can find the same thing and know for sure whether or not what he's saying is true or not. And sure enough, with the initial test, I started to find aluminum at very high levels, which was concerning. And then I start testing the pH of the rainfall and the snowfall, and those are things that anybody can do. Anybody can go in the store, don't go on Amazon, go somewhere else and buy a pH meter, cheap pH meter, and test the pH of your water, of your rainfall, of your snowfall, and you will see that the pH is extremely alkaline. It should not be alkaline, based on what the EPA says on their website, based on a lot of scientific data that came, and all the things that happened back in the 80s with the acid rain. You know that the acid pH should be acidic, should be in the range of 5, a little bit above 5, for regular pristine rainfall. But what we're seeing is sometimes the pH of the rainfall is above 8, and that's the pH of seawater. So that's not possible unless there's something else being put into the atmosphere that is dragging that pH way up, way higher than it should be. So we continue testing, and we're finding that there is a lot of metals that are not supposed to be in the rainfall, and just shows that, yes, they are spraying materials in the atmosphere. We're seeing a lot of potassium, a lot of calcium, a lot of magnesium, which is not possible to be up there. Some of the other things that we found, like you mentioned, we tested for surfactants, and to my surprise, that was a very surprising thing that we found. Snowfall particularly is very high in surfactants, and again, there should be no surfactant in snowfall. Why would it be there? And then if you look into some of the patent materials that they have, especially for when you talk about graphene and some of these other nanoparticles, if you put them in solution, they will coagulate, they will stick together. And the one way to keep them separated, to keep them apart, to keep them dispersed, is by putting surfactant in the mixture. And that's what they are using to keep things to flow the way they do. And again, we did recently, we were able to find some protocols to test for graphene in the snow, and we also tested positive. So we also now know that graphene is part of the mixture, just as you've been saying for a long time. You've been suspicious that this was present. Now we have confirmation that indeed is present and is also part of the mixture.
If I could hold you right there for one moment, Joe, and just to elaborate on a couple points you've made. First, on the surfactants, yes, exactly the effect that you described, keeping the coagulation from occurring in the dispersions. We see surfactants in some of the material mix from who we believe are the main primary material suppliers. American Elements is one of those. Surfactants also would make the frozen precipitation that we're told is just naturally nucleated snow much more slick, and it is difficult not to try to connect these massive traffic accidents like what just happened on I-81 in Pennsylvania when you have a frozen material, and I know this firsthand from the frozen material that now falls in Northern California. It is of a completely different composition than what has historically been the case, much heavier in many cases, much more slippery, clumpy. It is a very different animal, and so it would be logical to connect the type of instances we see traffic-wise, which are going off the scale, people who thought they knew how to drive in snow and now don't. That's certainly a part of the mix, but infiltrating the entire web of life. And in the case of graphene, for those that don't know what graphene is, it's now in our, and Joe, you found this in liquid and frozen precipitation tests, correct?
Dane, so far only in precipitation, because we started testing this winter, so we have not been able to do it on precipitation yet, because most of our, there is you know how the events now happen, right? It starts with the rain, turns into ice, and then turns into snow.
Yes.
So we collected everything that was falling from one event. So there was rain, there was whatever that mixture is, and then there was the snow too. So the short answer is yes, we tested in both, but it only tested during the winter. We want to continue that and do some tests in the spring and summer as well to see if those things are only in the winter or if they are using that throughout the year for some reason or another. We just want to continue testing.
And your point, though, what you brought up, and this is key, all these so-called winter storms now that often start out as rain and then, quote, change over to snow. And that's the term being used by all the climate engineering cover-up agencies like the Weather Channel, AccuWeather, and so forth. So as this precipitation changes over to frozen from liquid, we have patents that call for the use of materials like graphene as a chemical ice nucleating element. And those in power don't care how toxic these elements are. And for those that don't know what graphene is, Graphene, look it up. Look up graphene toxicological effects. It reads like a horror story. It's a vascular machete destroying parts of our body's vascular system and countless other downstream elements, and it can be used for a biological carrier. Can it be used to carry some sort of biological agent from the clouds to the ground? Certainly. And so, again, the ramifications from what's happening in our skies are grave indeed. And the confirmation that you have given us, Joe, again, we'll call you Joe for the moment, it's invaluable to us. I have another question. Working in the circles of academia, what is the response from your academic colleagues when you try to share any information with them that they don't really want to hear?
Yeah, this is another thing that shocked me, Dane. When I first discovered all of this, I tried to bring it up to some of my colleagues in the department I work as a faculty, and I was shocked to their response. A lot of them just ignored. Some of them just rolled their eyes and said that it's not geoengineering, it's just maybe pollution that came down and measured. They will deny, even though they are not doing any tests. They could do all the tests that I did. They are in denial. They will not accept what's happening. And I started thinking, why would they do that? And one of the things that I realized then is that, faculty people, they are very smart, right? They have to be smart to go through the process. But also, I see graduate school as a sieve to sieve out people that are very likely, very willingly to do as they are told and not question authority. Because through grad school, that's what you got to do. You got to be able to do what you're told and not question much, with a few exceptions. There are a few bright people that are very capable of questioning authority and making their own mind. But the vast majority, they are not. They are there to do what they're told, and they follow a program, and anything that goes outside their script, it's wrong, it's not right, and they will not go with it.
And those who do question meet with resistance, do they not?
Of course, there is a lot of resistance. And just in this example of those tests that I try to talk to people, they will not accept. And even though I'm a colleague, they know my credentials, they know the work I do, and still to think that what I'm saying is just nonsense, it's beyond me. And it would be very easy then to prove me wrong, to prove you wrong, to prove anybody that talks about geoengineering happening to be wrong. All you got to do is get an airplane that is, you can see the trail, you can see the contrail, right? Or they call it contrail behind them, which it's not. But you could just follow a half a dozen of those airplanes. Once they land, go inside and check. Why can't we do that? Why won't the government allow us to go and check airplanes that we see the contrail and go and look inside? That would silence every talk about geoengineering. But guess what? They will never allow that to happen. Why?
They won't allow it. And for those who, again, knee-jerk deny what's happening in our skies without doing a moment's investigation, at geoengineeringwatch.org, as you know, Joe, we have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. End of debate. They are spraying, period. And as you know as well, because you helped participate with us in this project, we took a NOAA flying lab, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab, to altitude, with top scientists in it, sampled what the heavy aircraft were emitting in our skies, and found exactly what we knew we would find, climate engineering elements. With the valid testing you did in the precipitation, they didn't even investigate. They ignore it because it doesn't fit with their chosen perception of the world. And that's the world we live in fact. It's a matrix in which so many are so dependent on that matrix that they will actually fight to defend it, even though it is pounding the final nails into our collective coffins. And on that note, I want to ask you this. The toxic materials coming down in precipitation, I know this is more in your specialty of what it's doing to crop production, soils. That is, in fact, having a very grave effect, is it not?
It is, Dane. So that's a good point. I think that ranges throughout the country because you have areas like California, based on the pictures that I've seen from you, your area is being bombarded with these materials, right? The rest of the country, it is too, but not, I don't think it's as much as you are, or maybe the East Coast is. But what the material does, and that's one of my specialties, once all the aluminum gets in the soil, if you're looking at a soil that has an acidic pH, which most soils that were under pine trees, coniferous trees, they will all be towards the acidic. The aluminum become available right away to whatever is growing in that soil, and aluminum is extremely toxic to plants as well. It will kill the plant if there is enough aluminum soluble in the soil. And for certain acidic soils that have been under this program and this the engineer for a long time, you'll have enough aluminum to kill the plant in the soil. Now, when you move to areas where the soil is more alkaline, like in the Midwest, there's a lot of soils that are still alkaline, then that aluminum is going to not be as detrimental because aluminum is not very soluble under alkaline conditions. It will stay in the soil. It will sit there dormant, right, let's say. But what happens is soils that are under food production, like your grains or your horticulture crops, like a lot of that in California, they use a lot of ammonium-containing fertilizer. And ammonium will acidify the soil. So you can say that most of the soils under crop production are all severely impacted by this amount of aluminum that is falling down. And that's a funny question you ask, Dane, because I don't know if you're aware of this or not, or your listeners. But right now, one of the most famous yogi from India is doing a third country motorcycle ride to highlight that the soils of the planet are dying. He's not linking with the geoengineering because I don't know whether he doesn't know or whether he doesn't want to say, because like you say in many of your broadcasts, once people start talking about this, they for sure will lose their NGO status, and then they will have to start paying taxes on the money that the donations that they receive. And I don't think that's the point he wants. I think he's trying to tell people the soil is dying and they need to do something about it. What's wrong with it, right? So he's trying to highlight that things are happening that we need to stop doing before it's too late. I think he's giving like a couple decades before all the soils are dead. And you know that a couple decades is way too long. We have maybe a half of a decade left before the soils are not productive anymore. Not because of the aluminum alone, but because of the whole package of what's happening throughout the atmosphere. Go ahead, Dane.
Well, all those points are extraordinarily important that you bring up. First, I want to back up to the soil's pH changes. We have monitored this in Northern California, in my region on the east side of Lake Shasta, with USDA soil scientists that I know personally, I know well, been in the field with them doing this testing. We've seen soil pH values change here. There's so much metal in the rain, so much loading of that metal into the soils. We've seen soil pH changes here go up 10 to 12 times toward alkaline, from 5.4 and 5.5 up to 6.5 and 6.8. And for those that don't know, on the pH scale, that's a magnitude of 10. 1 point on that scale is a magnitude of 10. That's how much metal is in the rain. And it is having a profoundly horrific effect on the forest. The entire forest is indeed dying. And this is where we have a truly double-edged sword. And as we continue to load the atmosphere with carbon by the burning of hydrocarbon fuels, we increase the acidity of that precipitation, which is increasingly making that aluminum that's now being saturated into our soils more and more bioavailable. It is truly a downward spiral, and the crashing of crop production is here. It's not coming. It's not off on the horizon. It's here. And yes, you're correct about those environmental groups, all of them. And our attorneys at geoengineeringwatch.org have spoken to attorneys from every single major environmental group, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, WWF, Earth Justice, all of them. None of them will touch geoengineering for exactly the reasons you cited. They don't want to lose their 501c3 nonprofit, so they pretend climate engineering isn't happening. And that's criminal. It's absolutely criminal. And I think in your position, too, obviously you have to stay anonymous, and you would chance losing any support or grants for your work if it was known that you're trying to bring light to this issue. That is certainly the case, is it not?
It is, and that's why, I wish it was a point where we don't have to stay anonymous and it can be all crystal clear, so people go and look at my credentials and see what I've done and who I am and decide for themselves whether or not they want to believe. But society is under such a spell that it will make no difference whether or not I say who I am, right? It's not going to change much to the whole, but you're right. I could lose much of the support I have to do the work I do, even though I'm trying to do the best I can to revert the situation. It's still very difficult, when you try to come up with proposals to get federal funding to do work that it's relevant, people will look at it and be like, this doesn't make any sense because none of this is happening. And so we don't get any funding to do what we want to do.
They blindly believe the official narrative, of course, those that are paying their paychecks and pensions, and therefore without any investigation, they jump to those conclusions, and then this type of work is completely eliminated, no matter how dire it is.
That's true.
Joe, I'm so grateful. My regard for you is immense. I'm so grateful that you have worked with us at geoengineeringwatch.org. I want to have you back on the broadcast soon. And for those that have not seen it, the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which the scientist on the phone with me right now participated behind the scenes in, The Dimming is available for free at the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Absolute conclusive proof of climate engineering operations being conducted in our skies with grave consequences. Please view, share that. Social media is trying to censor it. Please help us to circulate that film. I'm going to grab a couple more calls before we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. I want to have you back on again soon, and we can carry this discussion further. Thank you very much for calling in.
Yeah. Yes, Dane, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk soon again.
We will. Thank you. That's how grave it is, and this is what any conscientious and courageous researcher has to deal with. No matter how great their credentials, they meet with massive resistance from the system, from the matrix. I want to get to a couple more calls before we're out of time. We have Amy on the line in San Francisco. Amy, can you hear me?
Yes. Dan, very much appreciate your program. Your program's so extremely important for every human being live on this earth. And but through the program, I listen to your program. I have one question for you. I'm kind of a little confused. And you talk about the Dane, which was who are they? Who is the enemy? Who manufactured this and caused this all programs? Is a globalist or a big corporation or the government, CCP, Russian or China? I mean the U.S. All of the above or none of the above?
All the above, and ultimately, at the very top is those who print the money. Those who print the money from thin air can and have printed whatever they want, as much as they want, for whatever they want. Let's look at the U.S. Pentagon that's missing, based on the latest figures that we have, missing $31 trillion since the late 90s. Where did that money even come from, let alone where did it go? Again, ultimately, all roads lead back to those who print the money, who run everybody else that you just described. They control the entire matrix, and that's where the top of the power structure pyramid lies. That's where all roads lead to, and that's what needs to be exposed. And most Americans don't know how the monetary system works. They think it's some, quote, federal governmental agency that prints money. It's private bankers that print the money. Thus, they own militaries. Thus, they own countries. So, again, all roads lead back to those who print the money. That's the they whom we refer to. But thank you for that question, Amy. That's a very profoundly important question. Was there anything else you wanted to address before I try to grab another call?
That's it. Let's answer the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for standing with us in this battle, and thank you for bringing that question up with so many wonder. Dwayne in Abilene, Texas. Can you hear me? Thank you for calling in, Dwayne.
Okay, Mary Frances here too. We've been in correspondence with you for a while, and what we're asking is, can you add anything further to what you said last week, that there were signs that more people were waking up? We're traveling around Texas a lot, and we just haven't seen that kind of reaction. We're generally getting the dull stares. So if you could amplify on that, we would appreciate it. And as far as how long we got, well, we're using your figures, 2026. It sounds about right. It feels about right.
Thank you very much for the question, Dwayne. And it certainly depends what region you're in. Parts of Texas have not seen the type of environmental destruction that we've seen, for example, in the U.S. West and California and parts of Oregon and Nevada, Arizona, that have been decimated from the lack of precipitation, the toxic precipitation, the wildfires, which again serve the geoengineering agenda. And listeners can search that heading. Wildfires serve geoengineering agenda, one of our most important reports. So if you're in a region that's been more severely decimated by these programs, you're going to find more people that are now waking up, as opposed to, again, the moisture that keeps coming in off the Gulf Coast into Texas, which is spawning some of the, quote, winter storms. Since when do we have winter storms that come from the record warm Gulf of Mexico? There's not a meteorologist alive that doesn't know this is going on, but they're all towing the line for the power structure because their paychecks and pensions depend on it. So, Dwayne, again, it would depend on what region you're in. You're going to find more people that are awake. But if you want to help wake those around you, again, the printed materials are profoundly important, exponentially more effective than anything you can say to someone. And we do pass those on at geoengineeringwatch.org at less than our cost. We're literally at a loss to send those materials out. We print in mass, so we print at very inexpensive numbers considering the quality of the materials that are put out. And our only goal is to put them into circulation at our loss. So that's one way to wake those around you. And again, whatever region you're in is going to have an effect, Dwayne, on how awake people are on a percentage basis. And in regard to how long we have, I want to elaborate that there are certain trajectories. 2026 is one, for example, for statistically the 0 hour for no functional wildlife populations left on our planet. That's on the current course, but the course is becoming more exponential by the day, and that doesn't mean life stays normal till 2026. I want to clarify that with people. Those in power know that they can't maintain the facade much longer. At the moment in time, they know populations are waking up in mass. They will play much bigger cards, and I would argue we are very, very close to that point. They're already playing some of the cards geoengineeringwatch.org has stated they would play we stated this for a decade and a half, and it's happening. We stated when they couldn't hide the severity and immediacy of what's unfolding, we would have global conflict, pathogen release, false flags. Those are the three primary threats from the power structure that we have named. So all of that's happening. It's going to get worse fast, and I would advise everybody to buckle up and be ready for anything at this point because the storm is here. Thank you very much for calling in. Dwayne, was there anything else you had before I want to get to one or two more callers before the top of the hour?
Okay, well, we just wanted to let you know that we carry your flyers with us wherever we go, and that's great, and we appreciate it.
Thank you for your efforts to help us sound the alarm. We march in this battle together. Team effort. Thank you very much, Dwayne. We have Vicky, and I can't see where Vicky's calling from. I apologize. Vicky, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I'm in the Seattle area, Dane. And thank you so much for what you do. You really are a bright light in the dark. I started noticing chemtrails, if you were, in the mid-'80s and have been tracking and following you ever since. So thanks again.
Team effort, Vicky.
I'm wondering, yeah, thank you. So I'm wondering, more specifically, how they conceal the truth about the temperatures to the downside. I have been feeling for years how this is amping up, and I am very aware of the wet bulb effect, as you have explained, and certainly know about the changes that are going on. But when I'm outside and it says it's 65 and I feel like it's 75 or 80, is that just the wet bulb effect, or are they actually concealing the true temperature?
The latter is the case. We're seeing official high temperatures radically underreported. And further, though, you have the radiant effect of the intense UV radiation that's bombarding the planet. We're getting not just extraordinarily high levels of UVB, we're getting UVC. We've recently detected trace amounts of X-ray, which is the last spectrum of UV radiation. We all know how harmful that is. UVC is not far behind. It's a DNA damaging spectrum. The ozone layer is disintegrating. Based on the current trajectory, it looks as if we could have a functional collapse of the ozone layer as soon as 18 months, game over. At that point, climate engineering, the attempt to mask what's happening, is further fueling the fire. Single largest factor relating to ozone layer destruction, climate engineering. The wet bulb effect, I'll talk about that more next week on the broadcast. That's the combination of heat and humidity in which the human body can no longer function. We're already reaching that threshold in many parts of the world. It's going to get worse very, very quickly from here. So those are very important points you brought up, Vicki. I apologize. We're almost out of time. Thank you so much for standing with us. And I'm going to try to grab one more quick caller before we're out of time. Thank you for calling in, Vicki. Dave in Chelsea, can you hear me? And you got about 30 seconds, Dave. I apologize. We're out of time.
Yes. Could you address how I look at the radar and I see storms lurking on the West Coast all the time, but yet they fail to come in? How do they actually control that?
Extremely important point. Thank you. And I encourage listeners to search the engineering drought section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. They can blow those storms apart with radio frequency microwave transmissions, or they can migrate that moisture across the west to where they're utilizing it in the east by over-aerosolizing it. Too many condensation nuclei, too many particles. The moisture doesn't combine and fall as rain. It just simply migrates days of rainless, featureless cloud canopy, bone dry underneath. That's how you migrate it through. I'm out of time, Dave. Thank you very much for that profoundly important question. Got a few seconds left. I want to finish off with the listeners. This battle will take all of us. Please search the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, the activist suggestions link, to find out how you can help us to sound the alarm. Every day counts at this point. We're almost out of time. My deepest gratitude to all the activists and individuals that have helped us to carry this fight forward. This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.